Well, the first Sunday of this month, it was the Sunday of July 4th weekend. If you were here, you may remember that I said that for some people, love of country means proclaiming that America is number one. But I said, if you think America is number one, then that means that you think that everybody else is below you and beneath you and inferior to you. Jesus' whole message, his entire ministry, was about dissolving those levels and divisions and boundaries that were created between nations and people. He wanted us to see that we all belong to one another, that we were all one. So to proclaim America is the greatest at everything simply isn't true. And we have a lot to learn from people of other nations. The documentarian Michael Moore, his latest film finds him visiting other countries to take back their good ideas. And he visits countries that have superior healthcare and superior schools and better quality of life than we do. And what he finds is that in most countries, people work less than Americans. And yet, they are more productive and much happier. Nations where people get 8 weeks paid vacation every year. Nations where people each and every day get 2 hours for lunch. Now, I know many of you have visited countries where every afternoon they have a siesta, where shops and businesses close down for a few hours so that people can go home and they can eat and they can take a nap. That seems so foreign and strange to us as Americans. We think that's crazy. Why would I close my business in the middle of the afternoon where I could be making money? We think to ourselves, I have a to-do list of things to get through today. And if we don't get to everything, we feel guilty or lazy or unproductive. And we as Americans tend to admire people who are multitaskers, who can do lots of things at once and accomplish lots of things in one day. So for us, most of us can identify with Martha in today's gospel story. She's the doer. She wants everything to be perfect for Jesus' visit. There's a meal to prepare. There's a table to set. There's lots to do. And so she is resentful because her sister Mary is just sitting there doing nothing. And so she says to Jesus, don't you care that she's just sitting there and I'm doing all the work? And notice, Jesus doesn't side with Martha. He says to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by so many things. Mary has chosen the better part. That's really interesting for us. Jesus is basically saying that the being is the better part rather than the doing. And that is hard for us to wrap our minds around. Some of you may want to defend Martha. That work has to get done, and Mary is not helping out. But I love Bishop John Shelby Spong's take on our words of integration this morning, where he says Jesus was a feminist. What Jesus was doing coming into their home really broke all of the rules of Jewish society. He was a single man walking into a home where there were women who obviously were not his wife, and they were serving him. And then Mary was taking the role of a student. Rabbinical students would sit at the feet of their rabbi and learn from him. And that's what Mary was doing. And women were not allowed to study the Torah or to learn. So Jesus' whole being in that home is a very radical thing. And for first century Jews to hear this story, it was very shocking that a man would enter the home of women and that one of them would be studying and learning from them and not taking on the women's work in the kitchen. But Jesus was a radical person who was trying to break down those boundaries between rich and poor, men and women, saved and unsaved. This gospel story is one of the shortest in the entire Bible. It is only 6 sentences long. And yet it's a very well-known story, and it's one that really speaks to us, I think, as modern-day Americans, because we are the Marthas of the world. We are always doing. Our minds are always going. They're never still. And we very much are like what Jesus said to Martha. We are often worried, we are often distracted, and we are often resentful because we're always doing and because our minds are always going. So Jesus is trying to say to Martha, you're worried and distracted by so many things. You may have heard this phrase. It says, we are human beings, not human doings. And I really like that. But so many of us find it difficult to be still, to do nothing, to be like Mary. And it's hard to be a Mary in a Martha society. We live in a Martha society. It's a 24/7 society where we have round-the-clock news channels and people are always plugged into some device. We're always going. I think it's why so many people today have a very difficult time sleeping, because our minds are always so active and we're always doing. And we become very worried and very distracted and very anxious, and sometimes, like Martha, very resentful because of it. So, what do we do about all of this? Well, you may say, well, Pastor Sal, I'm kind of getting a mixed message from you, because you've been saying the past few Sundays how we need to be people of action. You said we want people at Douglas UCC to be people who are spiritually active. So don't we have to know what's going on in the world? Don't we have to take action? We can't just sit there and do nothing. Well, I think it's interesting that the gospel writer Luke immediately follows the Good Samaritan story with the story of Martha and Mary. It flows from one right into the other. Because you see, the Good Samaritan was someone who did take action. Action is necessary and needed, and Jesus himself was a man of action. But what Jesus is saying to Martha is, your actions are making you anxious and worried and resentful. The whole point of the story is saying that we must balance our doing with our being. This story of Martha and Mary, understood metaphysically or symbolically, is that this story takes place in a home. And in the Bible, whenever it mentions home, it is talking symbolically about our spiritual home, where our spirit dwells. And within us, there are 2 aspects. There's the Martha and the Mary. There's the doer and the beer. There's the outer and the inner. All of us have those 2 aspects in our spiritual home. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that they're dwelling in harmony and peace and in balance. It's not an either-or thing. It's not a Martha or Mary. It's a both-and. They both exist within us, and they need to be in balance. In the epistle newsletter that I send out to you every Friday, I have a quote this week from the spiritual writer whose name is Shelley Tiffin. And she said, "It should not be Martha versus Mary. It's Martha and Mary. We must balance what love does for people with what love says when it sits at their feet." I really like that. We need both. They're both important. So my question for you is, are you leading a balanced life? Do you take time each day to be like Mary? Do you just sit and listen in the quiet, in the silence? Do you have any time in your day for contemplation, to just sit at the feet of Jesus like Mary did? If you don't, you probably experience a lot of what Martha experiences: worry and distraction and resentment. We, at our church, there's a group of us who are going in the fall on a trip to New Mexico. I'm sure you've heard about it or you saw it in the bulletin today. We still have some spots open. But we are going to visit the spiritual writer Richard Rohr, and we're going to tour the center that he founded in New Mexico, and it is called the Center for Action and Contemplation. Because Richard Rohr says, it's the mission statement of the center, that we need a contemplative mind in order to do compassionate action. We need to be people who take time for silence and contemplation so that we know how to act. Martha is just going about the busyness of the activity, but she is not centered. She doesn't connect with the God. The front cover of our bulletin is very similar. It says, "Word and work." We have to be centered in the Word first, and that will inform our work. What is the Word? It tells us in the Bible. It says, "In the beginning," before everything was created, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. We have to attune ourselves each and every day to the Word and then go about our work. There's a spiritual classic book called Practicing the Presence of God. It was written by a medieval monk whose name was simply known as Brother Lawrence. And Brother Lawrence worked in the kitchen. That was his job. And in the book he says that whether he's peeling potatoes or washing pots and pans, he is connected to God in everything he does, in all of his actions. He is attuned to God. Martha is not attuned to God. She's doing all of this work. Mary is attuned to God. And that's why Jesus says she has chosen the better part. Jesus, as we know, gave us just 2 commandments. He said, love God and love your neighbor. In that order. Because I think that's what he was saying. Be attuned to God and then go love your neighbor. We need them both. And we need them both in balance, in harmony and peace. Now you may say, well, I can't get still. I tried to meditate.
I tried to do yoga.
I tried to just be quiet. I can't do it. My mind is always going. Even if I sit still, I start thinking of stuff. I don't know how to do this. Well, we're going to cover that next Sunday. Because in next Sunday's gospel, the disciples asked Jesus that very same question. They see him always going off alone, sometimes to the top of a mountain by himself. And when he comes back, he's always so joyous and peaceful and can heal and work miracles. And so they say to him, Rabbi, teach us how to pray. Teach us how to do that. So we're going to talk about that next Sunday to see how can we be people who can really be contemplative each and every day. And so between now and next Sunday, what I'd like to invite you to do is to just pay attention to the actions that you go through each day. If you find yourself anxious, worried, stressful, resentful, you need to get in touch with that inner Mary within you that is calling you to just be. As it says in the Psalms, be still and know that I am God. Namaste.